Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lee White, and I have the privilege of being the CEO of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. We are really excited about our event today. We're focusing in around disruptive technologies. Now, we currently have over 3,000 of our colleagues joining us via live simulcast across 8 different locations in New Zealand and Australia. Now, we said we would connect up our membership in very different ways, and hopefully you will see today is another example of how we're continuing to advance the interests of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. Now, you might have noticed something a little bit different about me today. No, it's not the colour of my tie. In fact, I'm being beamed in as a 3D hologram here today. And this is being done by our good friends at Shots Productions, who have been working with us in making this come to life, and also have a number of other pieces of exhibits in the auditorium here today as well. So please take the opportunity to look at those exhibits. Now, this is just one example, beamed hologram, of how disruptive technologies are changing our lives. So let's pose the questions. Does a presenter actually need to be in the same location as the audience? Clearly not. Does the presenter even need to be in the same country as the audience? Clearly not either. So do I need a taxi home when an app allows me to get a ride in someone's car? Will I even need a taxi at all when driverless cars are available as easily as Uber? So today, colleagues, this is all about looking forward and considering the opportunities and the potential of how disruptive technologies will change our lives. We can think about personal and business lives in changing in profound ways and how our decision making will be shaped. Now, most of the time, you're going to say, this sounds really exciting. I love to hear about this. But also, being humans, we're going to feel a level of unease, a level of trepidation, because in reality, our norm is continuing to change. It's only the pace of that change that will lead to a feeling of unease. But we do have to think that if we don't believe that change and embracing change is the right thing to do, then our thoughts go back to, say, a Kodak, and we've all heard about Kodak and how it missed the great opportunity with digital cameras. So we need to embrace change and think about the implications. So how do we ensure that New Zealand and Australia are on the right side of this change and are able to embrace it as technology continues to disrupt us and in new and yet unanticipated ways? So when I like to think about this, we think about the prosperity of our country, what will sustain that prosperity, and importantly, how technology continues to change and allow that propensity of sustainability of prosperity. This is hard to get your head around, but unless we do this correctly, we actually have an opportunity lost. So Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, in collaboration with the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, has undertaken research, provided analysis of that research, and developed some findings to help shine the light on this important topic that we want to debate today and continue that debate going forward. Our paper on disruptive technologies explores the risks and opportunities New Zealand businesses and households will face over the coming years and decades. But importantly, what we focus on is a small number of solutions. The debate is important. Landing on where we see potential solutions is critical. Now, this paper forms, as you will see around the auditorium already, the brand of Future Inc. And we are really proud of how we've been able to project Future Inc. into the heart of debates and discussions. Future Inc. is a series of thought-provoking presentations, inspiring ideas that are aimed at prompting public debate, the right type of debate, identifying strengths, weaknesses, threats, opportunities that will certainly make a difference. And that's where we believe we have an important role to play in public policy as Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. The focus of this series is to demonstrate the evolution of the role of the Chartered Accountant. Now, we've all heard the preconceptions, all of the references to a Chartered Accountant being only focused around the numbers, potentially only looking to the past. Well, today, this is another example that the Chartered Accountant is right at the heart of business and finance, ensuring the prosperity of our countries, and importantly, always looking forward. As a profession, we recognise that we need to demonstrate flexibility and also true leadership. Leadership that is focused on finding solutions and in a way that brings forward the right outcomes for all of us in our communities. We need to play this role, and we need to encourage more to come along in the debates and the discussions that we have. Now, for today's discussion, we will firstly talk with Shamubeel Eaqub. I think we all know Shamubeel. He's a well-known economist who has reviewed our paper, and I will be looking for Shamubeel to provide an overview of what he sees from the paper, importantly as well, his own reflections and insights. Then we will have a distinguished panel to join us and provide further conversation. The panel will comprise of Louise Webster, the CEO of the Innovation Council, Grant Robinson, Member of Parliament, Head of Future of Work Commission, and Linda Bulk, CEO of Aeronavics. I'll also make sure that there is time for those in the room here today for some questions as well. Now, you might say, well, if I'm not in the room, do I get an opportunity to participate in this discussion as well? And yes, you do. So, firstly, the easiest way would be through Twitter. Simply tweet against the hashtag FutureInc, which is the best way to engage with our panel. We'll be monitoring those tweets throughout the conversation. Now, as well, in the spirit of change, we'll also have an email account to submit questions to on our panel, Disruptive Tech, TECH, at charteredaccountantanz.com. Now, due to the large number of attendees, both in the auditorium here today and online, we'll try to make sure that we can work through as many of the conversations that are presented to us. Now, finally, I've made reference to this paper. Please take the opportunity to download that paper. You'll see that there's postcards which have dotted around with the QR. Simply scan that QR and it'll link you directly to our paper, which is also available on our website, charteredaccountantanz.com. Now, without further ado, let's commence the conversation. Shamubeel, thank you for taking the time to consider our paper. Importantly, we are looking for your insights and thinking around the particular matters that have been raised.
Thank you.
Now, if I might just open up with some particular themes in order to allow you then to take those through your analysis. Our paper has covered the application of a US job redundancy model to New Zealand data. Importantly, that's trying to look at risks within the New Zealand workforce. We've got our Colmar-Brunton survey of 2,300 Kiwis, particularly around their attitudes to technology. The next piece I particularly like because it gives practical insights, which is around 3 industry spotlights: electric and driverless cars, solar energy generation, and human genomes. And importantly, as I said in my opening comments, we've also tried to cover solutions and recommendations to government, businesses, and to individuals. So I'd be welcoming now of your insights.
Thank you. That was very Star Trek, wasn't it? I'm not going to go through the entire report because I think you should absolutely read it. It's a fantastic read. And ultimately, I think what it identifies for us is that technological change is so fast. It's an absolute burning platform for change. And it's easy for us to be conscious of the negatives, of the kinds of jobs that will be lost. But we also know that the positives, the opportunities that are available can be humongous. The long-term economic outcomes of technological change will inevitably be extraordinarily positive. That is the history of our country. That is the history of the world. The technology has been wonderful. Except, of course, we know that technology is becoming faster, more disruptive, and the short-term costs, particularly in terms of job loss for blue-collar jobs, but also increasingly white-collar jobs, that is going to become more difficult. The report is particularly helpful because not only does it go through and give you, I think, a really good sense of why and how we got here, but also a way to think about the future, the options that we have and where we might head. For businesses, I think it's really a story about awareness, about understanding where your industry fits and how you're going to deal with and how you're going to turn this into a positive. And if not, it's going to be positive. How do you manage graceful decline? For government, this is a very big challenge because we know that the way we tax now, the way that we have our education system set up, the way that we have our superannuation set up are not going to work. Essentially, when we think about the kinds of things that are possible, how long we're going to live, and how we're going to sort of extend into a future that looks so different from today, it is very different from the reality that we're in now. And the way that public policy works is very much one that's reactive, that reacts to things, and we're trying to hold on to the past. We have to get much faster, much better at public policy, and the government has a very large role to play. But ultimately, the role of technology when it comes to business, when it comes to politics and public policy, is about the democratization of the ideas and the solutions that are there. The idea of the conversation today is to think about what are the positives and how do we make it work. Thank you, Lee.
That's great. Thank you very much, Shammabil, for providing those insights and analysis to our paper. That really does set us up now well for our panel conversation. Just a minute, I'd like to take control, please. Well, it's one of those times when it looks like you are no longer needed, so I will bid you farewell and leave you in good hands. Dare I say, very good hands. So you can see I haven't been made redundant just yet. Colleagues, let's start the conversation. Louise, I'd like to come to you first as CEO of the Innovation Council. Clearly the paper's encouraging lots of focus on what's new and what's interesting. What are you seeing from your perspective at the Council?
Right across 9 different industry groups, right across New Zealand, from very small organisations right through to extremely large ones. So the technologies are incredible that are coming out. If you look way back in 2011 when we ran the first New Zealand Innovators Awards, the Supreme New Zealand Innovator then was Vend. And they're an online point-of-sale organisation. They had 4 people in their organisation at the time, and they now have hundreds and are all over the world. So things change very quickly, and I think the things that we're seeing coming through are vast and market changing. Really, it's about focusing on customer and finding new markets for new things. But I think really the real opportunity for New Zealand companies is to find the large companies, to find the small ones, and actually take advantage of these market opportunities and understand that they're actually developing and finding new customers in new marketplaces. By developing great new things that connect to current marketplaces that the large organisations don't necessarily service.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. Grant, welcome. Thank you very much for being here today. As you heard already a little bit from Shammabil, our research has focused in around the numbers of jobs that are potentially going to be redundant over the next 10 to 20 years, mainly due to automation, but a range of other reasons is there. I'm looking for your reflections, the big picture across the New Zealand labour market and where you see the social and economic consequences if this was to play out in the way the research is showing.
Yeah, no, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I think, the statistic that's in the report is that around about 47% of jobs that, as we currently know them, won't be there. Change has always happened in the workplace. So it's not like this is new. When the motor car was invented, there were 7,000 blacksmiths in London. They had to find something else to do. What's really different and what the report highlights is the rapid pace of that change.
Yes.
That, we're talking about a period of time where technology and the disruption from that is occurring so quickly that it puts huge opportunities in front of people, but massive challenges as well. So if you think about nearly half of jobs disappearing, you've also got the idea that somebody who leaves school today is likely to have maybe 6 to 8 different careers, let alone jobs. The notion of jobs as we've thought of them, of getting up in the morning, going to somewhere for 8 hours and then going home again, that's under huge challenge. We've already got businesses that are like IBM's Liquid program where people effectively bid in for tasks rather than jobs. So there's enormous change happening in what we even think of as work. For those people who've got the skills, who've got the ability to the people who create the new technologies, who develop the new apps, they're going to be hugely in demand and they're going to have potentially very high levels of wealth. If you're someone from a low-skill background, your job could easily disappear, and if you don't have good resilience, if you haven't got other skills, you're likely to find yourself a lot worse off. And that's the real challenge that we've got economically and socially in New Zealand, is how do we make sure that the prosperity that you're talking about here in Future Inc. is a really shared prosperity. This can be fantastic for New Zealand. It can get rid of the tyranny of distance. Our markets are right beside us, they're the click of a button away, but only if we make sure we have the infrastructure, the skills, the training, and provide people with the security to know that they can get out into that world.
Do you feel confident? Do you think we can do that?
We can, absolutely, but not if we sit and wait for it to happen to us.
Right.
What are the new types of business models? What type of regulation do we need to make sure that it's adaptable and smart? How does the school system change? And that's one of the big things which we might come back to later, which I think we really need to do. How do we make lifelong learning a reality? And then there's the big dynamic, I think, which is between flexibility and security. Everyone wants flexibility, the ability to build your working life around your family, to be able to take on different roles and different challenges. But equally, there is still a need for security. Mortgages, children, can't afford a house in Auckland, obviously, so mortgages are out. But around the rest of New Zealand, mortgages but in children and having families, there's a level of income security that's required to go with that. How do we match that up with a constantly changing working environment? So they're the big challenges we've got to
Quite balancing
address.
act in all of that piece. Okay, thank you, Grant. And a couple of things I think we do want to come back to. Shamabeel, good to see you again and always to work with you. Part of the paper does focus in on, which I'm quite interested in, the driverless cars, which we've all heard about in different ways. Obviously with a sense of reduction of crashes, increasing the capacity on roads so that, we can all move around more quicker. Multitasking in how we travel and increase mobility. Now, the paper comes up with a figure of $1.4 trillion US as being the economic impact of this driverless cars. I'd love your insights and thinking about all the elements around that part of how things may change. And do you see this as a realistic number?
The economic stimulus that you might get from driverless cars, particularly in terms of the safety, but also in terms of efficiency, being able to use your existing infrastructure much better. The quantum of the improvement is humongous. So that $1.5 trillion, if you put that in context, that's about 8% of the US economy as it stands today. The excitement that we had around 3D printing, which hasn't quite come to much, in contrast, I think driverless cars and much smarter technologies in our cars will do. It is such an important part of our mobility, of our economies, of our lives, that I think this is something that is going to create a huge difference, both in terms of personal safety, personal comfort, but also in terms of opening up our economy in a way for a sparse, large, geographically large, and fairly small population. It's a huge positive for New Zealand, but of course for Australia too. If you think about the mining trains, the road trains, just imagine going away from having to have all those drivers who are paid $100,000.
Quite so. I think the paper does say that they're already experimenting with some of the big rigs being driverless as well. So you can certainly see it coming. Linda, welcome as well. Now, I believe you've prepared a short overview of aeronautics, showing us in a way how the drones can change the face of traditional business. Tell us your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me to start with. It's a very relevant discussion to sort of the product that we make. So we make drones, or aerial robotics as we prefer to call them. We could sort of imagine all the implications that this technology could have for the world. We could imagine all these applications in like the public sector, in agriculture, and even though back in those days we could fly possibly for like a couple of minutes with like a little point-and-shoot camera. So they've called it a disruptive technology, even compare it to the PC like in the 60s, 70s.
So let's continue the conversation then. One of the pieces I'd like to touch on with the panel is around the ethical considerations of all of this change in technology. So our paper does obviously talk about the number of jobs that potentially change and become redundant. That's one aspect. The second is around increasing human life. And we all remember the Time magazine cover not that long ago, the photo of the baby saying this baby will live to, I think it was 142 years or something. Does the panel have a view on the pace of this change and the ethical positioning around that pace?
My fundamental principle on looking at this is that the technology needs to work for people, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Particularly when you come to that question of life, of human life. And what does it mean to be alive? And that is about, in my opinion, having functioning and loving relationships and all of those sorts of things. If we put ourselves in a position where we're artificially extending life that doesn't help fulfill that goal, then we've got major ethical questions. So the pace means that we all know we can't stand in the way of this technology, but that's where we need to have conversations like this, public conversations about how we want the technology to be used, what are the boundaries, and then as a government, we have, or I want to be government in my case, we have to be in a position to make the rules and regulations flexible and adaptable, but in line with the values of New Zealanders.
I think a lot of this technology is going to be used to cure significant diseases like cancer that we have in society, and to help, really extend life in that sense. So I think Grant's absolutely right. I think it becomes a value conversation and a quality of life conversation. So I think we're a wee way away from the, extending life into hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yes.
I think really, we're on the cusp of using this technology for great things, and I don't think we should be afraid of it.
Regulation can be crafted in a way that facilitates and allows innovation, disruptive technologies to be introduced and tested, but it can also perhaps be a limiter. What's the right balance here? Because this is all, again, in the spirit of pace. Where do you sense the policy settings on regulation should be placed?
I think there are probably sort of three broad aspects. The first one is around how do we think about traditional policies around health, defense, education. Those kinds of things are not going to be suitable. They're no longer fit for purpose in the world that we're in. We don't teach coding as a language, but it should be a compulsory language for all children. The second one is around how nimble policymaking is. We're still trying to collect GST, and we're talking about how we're going to stop things from coming in. Get over it, guys. We have to rethink how we tax society. So this is a big thing in terms of nimbleness of policymaking. Yes. But what I'm trying to get to that also is that policymaking is going to be very global in the future, because transactions, people's lives are becoming so global. Things are moving around. Ideas, technologies, the ways of improving life, extending life, curing things, they're going to spread across borders. If I can add one more thing.
Sure.
I think over the last 25 years, we have bypassed the public, and special interest groups have gone straight to politicians to get to policymaking. That is not the right way to do it in this age where the community is much more connected and much more aware of things. The reality is democracy needs to come back to actually having the will of the people. And to have that will, you must inform them first, which is why public debate, public conversation has to be such an integral part of how we change, because this change we're talking about is massive and it will be disruptive.
What's your sense around regulation with drones? Has that been well managed? Is there challenges there? How do you see the future?
Yeah, well, it's actually really interesting, and also hearing indeed the discussion here. One of the things, public education is incredibly important. What you're saying, indeed, we had some challenges here. We wanted to do things a little bit differently. It was not so much the sort of regulation around this, the use of this technology, but also how that integrates with our own health and safety regulations internally, of course. That's also with the disruptive technology, especially with something like this, where you've got moving parts and propellers, and you know, it can potentially be harmful. And this is also for our customers to integrate that within their operations. You know, can be a challenge. Outside even of, you know, the sort of public regulation. There's just been recently a new ruling introduced it's called Part 102, where the model aircraft regulation was called Part 101.
Right.
And essentially, in the Part 101, a lot of it is already covered because it's all about keeping people safe and keeping property safe.
Yes.
From, you know, the flying aircraft, essentially unmanned aerial aircraft. Now, there's certain restrictions there, like you can't fly in an urban center, or you can't fly in the flight path of full-size aircraft, or you can't fly at night, for example. And you're also not allowed to fly in other people's backyards without their consent. So these are all very sensitive regulations around model aircraft. And essentially what New Zealand has said is like, well, if you operate within those guidelines, we don't really have to regulate you any further. But now we say if you want to operate outside of those guidelines,
yes,
then you need to have a specific certification, which is a permission through the ruling Part 102.
Should there be more incentives available to stimulate greater ingenuity, greater inventions within the country? And if so, what would those incentives look like?
I think one of the biggest things we can do as a country is actually start collaborating together and stop competing with each other in order to get a smaller piece of a bigger pie offshore. You know, the thing that we encourage the most at the Innovation Council is that cross-pollination of ideas, and where industries collide and overlap is the real opportunity for that technology to cross from one industry vertical and market vertical over into another market vertical. And that's where the real value of these technologies often lies, is actually transferring it out of one industry and applying a completely different market vertical. So actually I think our competitive advantage as a country is probably in our hands as much as in the policymakers' hands. And that's actually recognising that we have a competitive advantage that the rest of the world don't have.
That word collaboration is one of the defining ideas, I believe, in terms of making a success of this future of work or future of technology. So yes, we've got to do that. You know, it's not the government's job to define the areas that will happen in. That comes from the innovators.
Yes.
Our job is to make sure that we support that with the infrastructure. So making sure that the technological infrastructure is available, the educational infrastructure is available. I think we can do better in terms of getting spend on research and development, both at a public and private sector level. You know, we have the idea of research and development tax credits. There will be other ideas as well. But the government's ability to pull those big levers has to be based around what's going to generate the wealth and the jobs and the work that will be part of the future. You know, the government's got a role to be clever and smart in incentivising the technology and the development of that, but ultimately the ideas have to be driven from the ground up.
I've got a list of 5.
Wow.
The first one is much more aggressive depreciation of capital assets, because we don't use commonly available technology in New Zealand. We can all improve our productivity very quickly if we could write those off much more effectively.
Yep, get that.
The second one is around R&D grants. I think we do need to do a lot more of that, and tax is a very effective tool when it comes to research and development. And then the three other areas, the first one is around education, around language, around coding. Getting that right through the DNA of our education system has to start in the beginning in primary school. Our tertiary education system, the way that we saddle our kids with massive student loans, it brings them out to the world not able to take on risk and be entrepreneurs. I think it's holding New Zealand back as a country, and we don't need to do this. And the final one is the hubs of innovation in places like Auckland. It's impossible to do business. It's got high cost of housing, terrible transport, and congestion. If you can't have a competitive city, how will you have a competitive economy?
I think it is also really important to be aware, and I'm sure that our audience here is more aware of it than sort of the average New Zealander, maybe even New Zealand business owner, how much support is actually available. And we're very here in New Zealand, I think, at least one entity that is really trying to encourage collaboration and helping New Zealand business. But it's also us business owners that need to reach out and utilize that to the fullest.
Conscious of the time, but there was one aspect Grant raised, and I think all of you have touched on it in different ways, which is around the education, particularly of the next generation of New Zealanders, and how do we prepare that generation and the subsequent ones for this level of change, or should we?
There's a stat that about 2020, the first language or the most commonly used language will be Chinese and the second will be Spanish. And I agree with Nabal's point that we really need to make sure that we're providing skills within our schools and within our education system that are going to provide our future generations to come, our future children, with those skills around coding and around language skills that will help transcend them into other new markets and understand value in different marketplaces. I also think that if very base roles are going to be taken over by robotics and over with new technologies, then there's an attitude and the thinking skills piece that also needs to be addressed.
The New Zealand primary school curriculum has as one of its objectives to prepare young people for jobs that don't exist yet. And we need that idea to be right across the education system. We need to make sure that we are genuinely preparing people for this new world. And that actually does mean a focus on what we've previously called the soft skills. You know, the ability to be creative, to problem solve, to collaborate. We're looking for analysts, we're looking for people who can know what to do with data, to manipulate that data. But equally, we're also looking for those people to be able to work well with others. My feeling is in the secondary education system in New Zealand, we haven't quite got that right at the moment. We also have to think about the fact that alongside all of this extraordinary technology, we still need plumbers, we still need carpenters, we still need mechanics, and we don't do a good job of encouraging people into good, fulfilling careers in trades in our country, and we should be much better at that. At the end of secondary school, we need a much closer linkage between employers, training providers, schools and students.
So I'm just watching the feed as it comes through. I've got to tell you, Grant, your remarks around education has given quite a spike in the Twitter feed here. So one of the most interesting questions being posed is, do we think it's actually realistic that we can educate the next generation on jobs or roles that don't even we can see at this point?
I think we need to prepare them for whatever job or role they have, and I think that's about teaching
how do you
them.
do that?
I think that's about actually preparing them to collaborate with others and work in project teams. And I know a lot of universities are now starting to develop programs where they don't sit in lecture halls anymore, as they did in my day, thank goodness, and take notes, but they actually spend their days more in classrooms and more in a work type environment where they actually have to work alongside other people.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, time has got to the point now that we need to bring to conclusion the formal part of this event. So without further ado, could I ask you to thank in the traditional way our panellists here, Louise, Grant, Linda and Shan Nabil. Thank you very much. So as I said, we are drawing the events of today to a conclusion. In closing, there's no doubt that technologies will continue to disrupt and change our lives, whether it is a driverless car, drones, or human genomes. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, technology is a huge opportunity, and it's up to you, it's in your hands to take the benefit of that opportunity. If you treat it like a threat, you'll be limited in your focus and your achievements. Today is all about grasping the opportunity. Will you be an early adopter? Or will you be the next Kodak? Or will you adapt, grow, and change? Or will you be redundant? Thank you very much for being involved with our launch today. Please take the opportunity to scan the QR, to have a look at our paper, and please take the opportunity outside to continue the conversation for the next hour or so. Thank you very much.